Hi, my name is Lyric, my pronouns are they, them, and I thought it would be a good idea to talk about my high school experience, why I never graduated, just all the different things that contributed to how hard it was for me, even though the schoolwork itself was easy. I couldn't do it with my mental health. Just all sorts of different things. I want people to be able to relate, though my story is very unique. I moved a lot during my high school years. Moved a lot during my life. Anyways, I wrote a whole bunch of notes down so that I wouldn't get lost. And the first thing I wrote is the trigger warnings, because that's pretty important. So trigger warnings for shitty teachers, sexual assault, family assault, suicide, hard drugs, including alcohol, self-harm, violence in general, and psych ward experience. I'm not going to go fully into that, but I still talk about it a bit. So if any of that is too overwhelming for you, feel free to not watch this. It's okay. Or at least wait until you're in a better mental state to watch it. My camera keeps sliding down. Hopefully it'll be okay. Okay, so elementary and middle school were already really difficult for me. And if you're curious, I can make another video about that, because there's a lot of stuff to talk about there. But I had already been self-harming since the beginning of middle school. I think it was summer of grade 6, so right before grade 7. I had been self-harming, but always in very secretive places. I didn't fit in to high school at all. I tried my best. I still managed to make some friends, which is really great. I think just because in school and you're surrounded by people, like, they weren't close friends, but they were people who would speak to me. Okay, I also didn't help myself fit in. At this point I didn't really understand what it was, but I was dealing with a lot of gender confusion and stuff. And I always felt like I was dressing up like a mannequin when I was getting dressed in the morning. And so when I got bored and I started dressing pretty ridiculously. So I'll insert some pictures. But just, it was fun and wonderful, and I would still, like, I can definitely rock that type of outfit again. It's just, not the type of thing that'll get you a lot of friends in high school. At least not a very small town high school. That's a big point in this too. I grew up in a very small town, Ontario. Like small, like the town that I lived in for most of my childhood had less than 500 people. It was very, very small. Both my elementary and middle schools closed down because they didn't have enough people in them. My elementary school had less than 100 students when it closed, and I was one of the 8 grade 6 students in the whole school. So, small town. So not super accepting, especially not of people who they think might be gay or trans or different. Trans wasn't even a word that I knew until I sort of started learning about it because there was one trans guy in our school, and I was obsessed with him because I didn't realize it had a lot to do with my own gender. But he gave me hope which was really good. I did really well in my classes, all throughout grade 9, I think, or at least through most of grade 9. I remember I got 90 something in woodshop because I love woodshop so much. So it was never the work that was too difficult. It was always the situation, the amount of people around me, the anxiety. Yeah. So because I couldn't really hang out with the people I wanted to because I didn't feel like I belonged with them. Like I never felt like I fit in. So I started hanging out with a group of, like, I guess it would be the outcasts, but in this case, it was not good outcasts. These were just kind of scumbags, but not like they were trying to be. They were just people who I shouldn't have been friends with. I made my first boyfriend through that. Actually, I think I made my first boyfriend through a youth group trip. This is true. I'm remembering now. I made my first boyfriend through a youth group trip, and then he introduced me to the other friends at school. That's what happened. I was 14 at the time, and he was 16. So, things were going pretty well. The people at school were pretty nice to me. Like, I just didn't have a lot of people. I was doing pretty well in classes. I loved drama and woodshop and art, but I didn't really have art that much at the beginning. And then in October? I don't know. I guess I met him in the summer of grade 8. It's kind of messed up. Anyway, so there was an assault that happened. Well, actually, there were several assaults, but the main assault that happened that gave me all my flashbacks, or at least began the spiral of flashbacks in my life. But I probably would have ended up having flashbacks because there's stuff from my young childhood too. Happened. And then it was hard in school. I continued to date this guy for a while because I didn't know what to do. I dated him until he broke up with me, and then I had a huge wave of relief, and I had this crazy crying fit where I felt so much better. All this emotion was being released. And my friends just thought I was sad because we had broken up, but it hadn't. Okay. So anyway, I had to keep going to the same school that he was in. And so classes were getting harder and harder. I wasn't really able to pay attention as much. So I started not doing quite as well. I was still doing pretty well, but not doing quite as well. And then at the end of grade 9, out of nowhere, I was told that I'm moving in with my dad in Ottawa. And what had happened was, I had lived with my mom up until this point in my, forever in my whole life. I had had a conversation with my dad, and he must have thought that I had agreed to live with him at some point, but that never happened, so I'm not sure what happened. So that was really difficult. I was in Ottawa, my oldest brother, the one who isn't great, he had assaulted me throughout my childhood, but then stopped for a few years. He lived there. My parents didn't know. So that made going to school, or just existing, harder. And he was just terrible to me too. Just emotionally abusive all the time. That never stopped, making me feel very useless. So I went to a new school, and this new school was very different than my other one, but it also wasn't a huge school. I did not fit in. The classes were confusing. I didn't understand anything, and I was at this point like kind of numb, so I had a really hard time making friends. Like I couldn't really talk to people, but I did manage to make friends with a few people, and it was a group of mentally ill young people who dressed in crazy colors like I did. It was like everyone was depressed. All of my friends are depressed, which is quite interesting. I guess you can kind of feel it when you're around someone else who isn't okay. So it was good that they were there, because otherwise I would have been completely alone. But it didn't work in that school. And during this time in the school, another person who had started talking to me was my friend's older brother, who was 19 at the time. I was 15 when he started talking to me at the very end of grade 9. And then when I moved to Ottawa, because he could drive, he kept messaging me. So even though to me I felt like it was consensual, it was 100% assault. I was too young. I was going through a crazy mental health thing after being assaulted. I had told him about being assaulted, and previously he had gotten me drunk to assault me, like, the first time, I guess, or the main time. So he's clearly an assaulter. He's not an okay person. So anyways, he was continuing to message me and try and come and visit me during grade 10, and I was just spiraling. So that's when my cat is chewing on cardboard in the background, so that's what that noise is. That led to my first suicide attempt, my first real suicide attempt. There were lots of times that I'd been very close, but nothing that, like, this. I had been planning for a really long time. I had been writing letters. I'll go more into this in another video if necessary. I could do a video on, like, my suicide attempts or something. But anyway, I'd really gone into it, and I had messaged people who were offline, pretty much goodbye messages, but it didn't really say goodbye. It was just, like, thanking them for being my friend and being nice, and I hope they have a good life, and blah blah blah. Just that I wish the best for them. And so I had sent one of those messages to the most recent assaulter, and he wasn't actually offline. He just, like, was set to invisible or whatever. So he called the cops, because he still remembered where I lived, because he had come to where I lived to assault me. And so the cops show up before I can do anything. And I'm a mess, and my stepmom's a mess, and we get taken to the hospital. And that's a whole other, that's another video too. But they let me out of the hospital that night, which was, well, like, I'm glad they did, but, like, I feel like that was really dumb. And I just thought, maybe going to my old school would make me feel better. I don't know what I thought. I just thought, well, I didn't attempt until I went to this new school, so maybe that's it, you know? Like, I wasn't, at this point, I hadn't really accepted any of the assaults in my life. I had really, I was still always convincing myself that it was at least partly my fault, because accepting that it wasn't makes it even worse, you know? So, yeah, I convinced my dad and stepmom to let me move in with a friend because my mom had moved into a one-bedroom apartment with her boyfriend at the time, thinking that I had wanted to move in with my dad, which I had never agreed on. So she didn't really have room for me. So I moved in with a close friend that I'd grown up with and her very, very busy mom. I did that so I could go back to my old school with my assaulter. But that wasn't why I went back. He's just still there at this point. So because I had to go back to that school, I started hanging out with the type of people. I started smoking cigarettes. I started hanging out with people who did just like the hoodlums, you know? And it was fun. Like, it was nice. I felt accepted. I felt good. But also, none of them knew me at all. I didn't know them at all. We would just spend time together. So then I started doing drugs to cope, and I did other really dumb crap, like just stupid crap that I really, I don't know, stuff I'm not proud of, stuff I can't even remember. And so after a few months of that, I was at my dad's for the summer or visiting. I think I was just visiting, and I had left my journal there, but I'd left it open, and he said, "Oh, I thought there was a sign from you that you wanted me to read it." So my dad read my journal, which was screwed up, but it was the right thing to do in this situation because he found out about all the drug use, and he got my mom to get me to move in with her. So then I was in a one-bedroom apartment with my mom and her boyfriend, and that was very overwhelming because her boyfriend was not great to us. And at this point, moving in with them didn't stop me from doing drugs. I was continuing to do drugs without people really knowing. And then I continued to try and go to school, but history class, because I couldn't get into Native Studies, and you have to either have Native Studies or history to graduate in this certain school I was in. Because I couldn't do Native Studies, the history class was so depressing, and the teacher made it so much harder. He would talk about these people and tell their life stories and talk about their family and talk about how great they were, and then show a movie where an actor depicting that person was killed, and we just watched them die, the person that we were just taught about, and everyone else seemed fine, and it would destroy me inside. So I could not do that, and I had already, it's hard to see, so maybe I'll insert pictures, but I had already burned my hands more self-harm. Like, self-harm continued all throughout those years. And I was, at this point, the stress of being in there, I was like chewing on them and stuff, and then he talked to the principal and vice principal about the fact that I was like chewing on my hands, and then they wanted to talk to me about my hands or about smoking or something. It was really weird. They asked me if I smoked, and then I said no, because I had quit cigarettes at this point. And then they were like, well, put your hands on the table. So I put my hands on the table like this, and they were like, flip them over, and I flipped them over, and I had the burn marks on my hand. And then they just looked at me, and I just looked at them. And then I left. Like, I don't know, like, they clearly had no mental health training whatsoever. So I continued to have a hard time in school. I was trying my best, but I just couldn't. It was so hard to concentrate on work. Concentrating became harder and harder. But then my mom's boyfriend got a job in Saskatchewan, and he needed to go there and get the job so that he could stay in the country because he's from England. So he had to leave, and then it was just me and my mom together, and I decided to come off the drugs. So I was going through withdrawal, was in the same house as my mom, but my mom didn't realize I was going through withdrawal. But she was so helpful. Like, I would talk about, I have cramps in my feet, I can't sleep, and she'd, like, sit there with me, and I'm sure she probably understood what was happening, but, she was just so supportive, and it really meant a lot. But then, I still couldn't do well in school, and then something happened that made it so that my mom had to move to Saskatchewan with Rob, so that she could drive him to work and stuff, because some licensing stuff was weird. So then I was left alone in the one-bedroom apartment until that school year finished. And then I wasn't sure what I was gonna do. And for some reason in my mind, I was like, I need to stay at this school. Like, everything will be okay if I stay at this school. Even though that's not the case at all. So I moved in with the assaulter, the second one I've talked about here, the one who drove to Ottawa and stuff, the one who called the cops on me during my first suicide attempt. I moved in with him and his alcoholic roommate, and I lied to my parents about who I was living with, because none of them were there, and that was a bad idea. Not only did I have to wake up very, 2 hours early to get to school, because the only way I could get to school, there weren't buses to the town I lived in, was getting a ride from the assaulter, more than an hour before school started, and then I would get into the school with, the janitor, and then I'd, do my makeup or whatever at school, and then just, wait for people to show up. And then after school ended, everyone would leave, and I'd have to wait at least 2 hours, 2.5 hours, to be picked up by him on the way home from his work. And he said for the rides, even though it was sort of on the way, I guess he had to go slightly out of the way to drop me off, that I would have to do an hour of cleaning. I thought he said a week, but maybe he changed his mind to a day. But I cleaned as much as I possibly could. It was never enough for him. They were so disgusting. And the amount I cleaned was a lot. Anyway, that doesn't matter. So, but I continued going to school because that was the only way I could see anyone who would speak to me like I was a person. So my mental health deteriorated again. My mom was gone. I was living with not great people. Though the alcoholic was honestly a sweetheart. It still isn't an okay situation for a kid. So yeah, I started skipping more school. I'd go to school, but then I wouldn't really go to the classes that I didn't like. I'd just go to woodshop and drama and to see my friends. And I could live there until the end of grade 10, but then just before summer, I was told that we all had to move out because he couldn't afford that place anymore. So I moved in with my dad during the summer, and then I decided, I couldn't, my brain would not, everything was just so confusing. I didn't know what to do. I was overwhelmed. I knew I just wanted to be with my mom, so I planned a visit to my mom. And so I went to visit my mom with, one suitcase, for a 2 weeks visit, and then I never left because I needed to be with her. So over the next, year, my dad and stepmom had to keep shipping my stuff over because I didn't bring anything. Yeah. But it was really important for me to be with my mom. So in Saskatchewan, it was me, my mom, and her boyfriend in this house. And it was pretty nice. It was still uncomfortable with my mom's boyfriend, but it was a lot bigger of a place. so it was a little easier, I guess. But being with my mom was what was the most important. Me and my mom are so close. I really don't know how to exist without her nearby, which is hard. I don't like to think about that too much. So anyway, I tried to fit in at the new school, and I did not. They immediately judged me because I came into school with my neighbor, and they thought she was my sister, and she was annoying, so they just didn't want to talk to me. So that shows the type of people they already are. And then they didn't want to talk to me because I wasn't from there. All of their great-grandparents grew up together. Like, they've lived in Saskatchewan their whole life. Being in Saskatchewan is like going back in time 60 years. It is not fun, and I can make a whole video. It wasn't okay for any of us living there. Saskatchewan was not a good time. None of the roads were it just wasn't. It was like the Wild West. It was ridiculous, and I can definitely, I'll make a video about that at some point because that was crazy. So I couldn't fit in. There were already these very specific cliques. A few people spoke to me because they were the nice people in the school. So that was nice, but like I never got too close to anyone. But I still did make some friends, and that's the thing. School definitely made it easier for me to make friends. So I don't really have a lot of friends now. So then, as everything was kind of not going well, my brother, the oldest one, the one who assaulted me, he had to move in with us because things weren't going well for him wherever he was. And again, at this point, my parents knew nothing, and I couldn't say anything. And then he was there, and I had my room in the basement, so I just kept leaving my room less and less. Sorry. Even at one point, using a bucket as a toilet downstairs in my room so that I didn't have to go upstairs and possibly see him. So life definitely got a lot harder at that point. And then I knew that I was about to attempt suicide. I knew that any day, like, there was just no way I could hold back anymore. So I spoke to my mom, and she drove me 2 hours to the nearest city, to the psych ward there. And they were weird, saying that they didn't really have a bed, or that I'd have to stay by myself overnight in this emergency ward in this enclosed room and stuff, and it was just overwhelming. And so we left, but then I stayed at a hospital, just like a regular hospital, until they had a bed open, which was good because then I wasn't at home. But I wasn't ready to talk to my mom about it because I felt like I would hurt her too much if I told her about her son. So she stayed with me in the hospital for, like, she kept coming to visit for 4 days, I think, and then I was moved to the psych ward. And I can make a whole video about my psych ward experience. It was overwhelmingly terrible, but there were good things that came out of it, so I'm glad it happened. But I sort of made a friend there. And so we had added each other on Facebook. We're legally not allowed to stay in contact or whatever, but we added each other on Facebook, and then I was texting him. And I started telling him when my brother would text me inappropriate things, or like it was mostly just messages, inappropriate messages. At some point, my brother started taking pictures of himself, just weird, not so blatantly sexual that I could be like, here, look, but sexual enough to make me incredibly uncomfortable. Pictures of me or pictures of him. Like, I was making a salad and he took a picture of me just to make me uncomfortable. So at one point he sent me these uncomfortable texts and I screenshotted it and sent to my friend. And he was like, your brother said that to you? I was like, yeah. And then I sort of talked to him about what had happened before. And he kept trying to encourage me to talk to my parents, and I was like, how am I supposed to do that when he's right here and stuff? And it was just so much. And of course, the moment I got back from the hospital, my brother was super horrible to me, so I wanted to go back, and it was just not great. I ended up staying in the hospital for almost a month, though if I had stayed a week, I probably would have had the same amount out of it. But the thing was, I needed to not be in my house, and I wasn't ready to talk to anyone there. Like, I didn't tell the psychiatrist or anything, psychologist, whatever, anything about the assaults or anything. I just lied. So then they were like mad at me for being upset and not talking and stuff, and it was just weird. Like, they never asked, why don't you want to go home, you know? That's kind of an important question. So anyway, I went back home. My brother was still there. And then at the end of that year, my mom was like, okay, we can't be here anymore. This place sucks. We're moving back to Ontario. But my mom's boyfriend had to stay in Saskatchewan to keep his visa. So my mom, my brother, and I took a 4-day Greyhound bus trip from Saskatchewan to Ontario to move back to the small town we lived in, into a small crappy apartment. I got to see my old friends and it was really nice. Then I had a trip planned to first visit my stepmom's friend, because my stepmom was all anxious about my suicide attempts, and she wanted to meet someone who had attempted suicide before and is doing a lot better in her life now. And it was really good. It was amazing, because she clearly had mental health problems, and she talked to me about her assault, which made me help me talk to her about my assault, and she was like the first person I talked to about it. I still didn't really talk to her about it, but I sort of mentioned it. And then I continued from that trip to visit my friend who knew about my brother. And when I was with my friend, my brother texted me, and he was like, my friend was just done. Like, he was frustrated. And he really encouraged me in such a sweet way to email my parents. Okay, so I sent my parents an email, and I could read out the email in another video, but just telling them everything, telling them the assaults from my childhood all the way up to right then. I could make there are many videos I can make. So if people are interested or want to hear more, there are a lot of side videos I can make about a lot of this. And I sent it, and it was the best decision I've ever made in my life. I think I was 16 at the time. So 5 years ago. I literally counted that out on my hand. That again, that is not school related. If, like, I used to be able to do math and stuff really easily, but it's more of an attention related thing. I can't let my brain do math because my brain's too busy thinking of all the other things that are happening, you know? So I have to use visuals to, like, really get myself to focus, if that makes sense. So that's one of the reasons that I left school, because it was just so difficult for me to focus, even when I knew what I was supposed to be doing. But anyway, I emailed my parents, and then they had my brother move out of the house before I got home. So I went home to an apartment with just my mom, and it was so good. It was so good. My mom and my stepmom were both immediately super supportive, and believed me. My dad questioned me a little bit, but he's still been supportive. I think it was hard for him, really hard for him thinking about his son like that, but it wasn't okay for him to question me. Yeah, but they've all been quite supportive. So I was back living with my mom, very happy that I was just with her, feeling a lot better because I had finally stopped hiding all these secrets. At this point I still didn't know I was trans. I still hadn't accepted it, which is really funny because there are so many different things that hinted at it, which one of the things I'm about to talk about. I went back to the school again, the same old school again. This is grade 12 now. So I had been in Saskatchewan for grade 11, and now I'm back in Ontario for grade 12. My cat is chewing on the cardboard again. I think he feels like he's supposed to make noise when I'm making noise. So I was trying really hard. The kids were so nice to me, like everyone in school was really nice to me. I think because I just stopped caring and I stopped like holding back, so I was like very authentically me, and people appreciate that. So people were pretty nice to me. Again, I still wasn't very close with anyone, but people were still nice to me. Though some were judgmental from the drug use in prior years, which I understand. Especially when you're in high school, like it's easy to judge people because you don't have that much experience with people around the world. So I tried going there for a while. I was having a really hard time in the classes. And then one of my friends was going to an alternative school. He was on my bus, and he talked about the school and how he was more comfortable there. So I talked to my mom about going to the alternative school. So I would bus to the regular school and then get on another bus and bus to a different school to do work there. And it was so much better. The kids going to that school were just so much more my type of people, a lot more accepting. A lot of them were from not great homes, upbringings and stuff, so we could relate to each other. But still, I wasn't super close with anyone there. Just pals, So I managed to get some credits, but near the end of it, some of the work was hard for me to do. I almost got my English credit, but then there was work where you had to correct sentences that used they, them as a singular to he/she, and I couldn't do it. I was like, I know what you're asking of me, but I can't do this. This isn't correct anymore. This literally isn't grammatically correct, what you're getting me to do. And at this point, I wasn't even out to myself as non-binary, so the fact that I'm like, no, they, them are allowed to be used singularly, blah, 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 is pretty like, hey, you're trans, But I was always like, I'm just a really good ally, like growing up, which is pretty funny. But like, it's good. Like, that's the best way to start out, because I know I don't know lots. I know one in particular, student that I was sort of friends with who was very homophobic, and then right after high school came out as being gay. So I'd rather be an ally until I come out than be the opposite until I come out, I'm glad I wasn't hating myself. But she was probably from a household where you were taught to hate yourself. I was from my parents, thankfully, were always so wonderful that I never even, like, I knew I liked, I guess, pan romantic. I knew I liked everyone from when I was a kid, but I never even had to think about coming out to my parents as that, because I knew if I brought a girl home and I said she was my girlfriend, that they wouldn't even think twice, really. And that's amazing. I know that not many people have that. It was a little harder for them, the fact that I'm trans, because I'm changing more than anything, but I'm not really, and they're still super supportive. They understand. Sorry, that was a bit of a tangent, but so I pretty much stopped going to that school because all the work they wanted me to do at that point was like dated, and I realized when I was looking at the hairdressing college I wanted to go to, which is in BC, because my mom was moving to BC. I don't remember when she moved, but my mom moved to BC to live with my grandma because my grandma needed someone to help take care of her. I think that was after I left the school, but I'm not sure. But she left before me, and then a few months later I moved to BC too. So I only need 4 or 5 more credits to officially graduate, but the school I wanted to go to, all you needed to do was be 19. So I was like, why am I forcing myself to do this work that's making me miserable when it means nothing to the school I want to go to. So I left, and I moved here to BC. I've actually lived in I've lived in 4 different places since I moved to BC, which is ridiculous, and they've all been within the same, like, mile. Hopefully we won't be moving again for a while. But, I tried going to the hairdressing school, but the travel there and stuff was overwhelming, and it just wasn't good for my mental health, so I had to stop a few weeks later. I can make another video completely about that. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. That's pretty much my whole high school experience. I moved a lot, which made it harder, but the one thing that made it most difficult for me to graduate was the abuse. I can't concentrate anymore. I can learn in different ways. I've found different ways that I can learn, and I've taught myself a lot, but the whole school system of sitting down, having people around you, just having people around me in general, makes it so that I can't concentrate, because I'm always aware of what they might be capable of doing, you know? Even if they're the sweetest people ever. And I think that's also why I couldn't make great friends, which made it harder in school too, because I have a really hard time getting close to people because they could hurt me. And I don't want to trust anyone, because if I trust them and they break the trust, then it's horrible. So if I just don't trust anyone, then I don't have to worry about that, which isn't okay. But like a lot of the reason I couldn't stay in school was trauma. So please don't automatically judge someone because they couldn't be in school or because they didn't graduate. There was the fact that, like, thinking that I couldn't do the work is why I couldn't graduate is the farthest thing from the truth. Like, if I had worked really hard when I was 14, if I had stayed at that age before that first huge assault, if I had stayed at that age for the whole 6 years, I probably could have graduated. But just getting older, maybe my brain changing, I do have mental health things in my family. I can't learn in that way anymore. But yeah, one day I might get the rest of the credits, probably online, and graduate. But right now I don't need to. Working from home, selling my patches, doing my best. I am on disability for I think officially it's for severe anxiety, which is true. But the severe anxiety is based around my PTSD. It's just harder to be diagnosed with that. Whew. So, I hope this was helpful to someone. Don't feel terrible if school was difficult for you. Don't feel like you weren't as intelligent as someone else because you weren't able to do a class that they could. Because there are so many other factors than just that. Everyone learns differently, and just because you couldn't learn something in a class doesn't mean you're incapable of learning it. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments, and let me know of any other videos you'd like me to do. I hope this was informative. I'm doing well. Don't feel terrible for me. This video wasn't to get pity from anyone, I promise you. I don't need your pity. I just want people to understand that they're not alone. And for other people to understand that just because someone's not doing well in school, or, just stop judging people so much. Just please stop judging people so much. That's all. I hope you guys have a good day. I hope this was helpful. Sorry it was so long. Bye.